Our chief procreation officer, Luo Chong, having secured his family line with 2 new babies, immediately pivoted to his other full-time job, being an absolute logistics maniac. While his elite divine strategy guard was wearing out thousands of rifles in hellish training, turning them into glorified fire pokers, Luo Chong was busy orchestrating an industrial symphony. He commissioned a floating arsenal, ordered 20,000 handcuffs, and, in a moment of sheer genius, envisioned a steampunk construction empire of steam-powered excavators and tractors. But even a master planner can slip. At the final war council, a single click of a handcuff sparked a terrifying realization. He'd forgotten to pack lunch for the 20,000 prisoners they planned to capture. After frantically recalculating the rations, the expedition finally launched. His elite troops, bundled up like human dumplings, arrived in the frozen north only to be greeted by a local commander who looked at their advanced rifles with utter confusion and asked, "What are those fire pokers?" The technology gap is real, and the war is about to begin. All right, then we'll keep it simple for our auxiliary troops. Qubing made a swift decision. A wooden shield, a long wooden staff, plus ropes and handcuffs for each man. They can go in and tie people up after we've secured the battlefield. The long staff is perfect. It can knock a man down without being lethal. Equipment for 4,000 men. That should be manageable. Yi nodded and got up to make the arrangements. In the days that followed, the entire camp buzzed with activity. The Divine Strategy Guard began their intensive recovery training, while Sima was busy setting up the factory ship, producing ammunition and unloading supplies. Over on Yu Ye's side, the moment the recruitment order was issued and the people heard they would be helping to capture prisoners, and that meals would be provided, they signed up in droves without a second thought. No pay, no problem. In this place where resources were scarce, a full meal was more valuable than money. What's more, if there were any casualties, the tribe would provide compensation according to the standards for regular soldiers. By any calculation, it was a deal you couldn't lose. Voiceover: when a technologically superior force, designed for a curb-stomp battle, runs into the magical attack of an Arctic climate, they finally understand a simple truth. War is not just a contest of weapons and tactics, but also of logistics, morale, and the ability to adapt to the weather. Also, never underestimate the immense appeal of the words "meals provided" in any era. It can be a more powerful motivator than coin. In this frozen land, the concept of private property was still a novelty. Fields and grain belonged to individuals, but any game brought back from a hunt was still shared among all the families. When Yi led work parties, the notion of payment never arose. In the simple worldview of the people here, if the tribe called for war, you answered. What was there to discuss? Qubing, a child raised in a society of private ownership, found this completely incomprehensible. Still, as long as they were willing to fight, that was all that mattered. Besides, the winter in this godforsaken place lasted for half a year. They were idle anyway. If they didn't get out and move around, they'd start to gather dust. With the recruitment order issued, the administrative officers were a hive of activity. Yi, meanwhile, rushed to the lumberyard to hurry the craftsmen along with the shields and staves. But the progress was agonizingly slow. "Uncle Yu, don't worry." A glint appeared in Qubing's eye. "We brought spare steam engines and power saws on the ships. They'll cut wood much faster than your windmill." That's right. When Feiyu chimed in. "And lathes, too. They'll turn out wooden staves with incredible speed." Steam engines? Power saws? Lathes? Yi stared, wide-eyed, feeling like a primitive man emerging from the wilderness for the first time. Well, it was time for another lesson. Qubing and Feiyu simply dragged Yi aboard the 2 mysterious factory ships docked at the pier. One was a chemical mixing ship, crewed by a gang of tech nerds from the chemistry team. The moment they arrived in this icy world, they were like kids on a sugar high, howling with excitement. My God, this place is a paradise for making double-base propellant. Why? Because the production of smokeless powder required strict temperature control. Back in the Han tribe, they had to rely on ice blocks stored in cellars during the winter to cool the reactions. But here, the entire landscape was a natural refrigerator. The tech nerds immediately began clamoring to move their workshop ashore, arguing that the ventilation on land was better and more suitable for their alchemy. The other was a mechanical processing ship. When Yi saw with his own eyes the steam engine puffing white vapor, heard the thump of the air compressor, and watched as the lathes spun at high speed, turning logs into smooth staves, he was utterly and completely shaken. It had only been a few years, and the tribe's development had already reached such a terrifying level. Once the production plan was set, efficiency skyrocketed. The steam engine and various pneumatic tools were moved to the lumberyard and, fueled by firewood, began to operate at a frantic pace. Equipment for 4,000 men was a piece of cake. With the equipment sorted, it was time to train the troops. The auxiliary force was organized using the most traditional system of squads and platoons, grouping fathers and sons, brothers, relatives, and neighbors together. There was no time for ideological team building. It was better to tap directly into the instinct of kinship. On the battlefield, if your own people didn't save you, who would? Fathers and sons fighting side by side, brothers united against a common foe. The wisdom of their ancestors was undeniable. The Divine Strategy Guard, meanwhile, began their own hellish recovery training. Qubing specifically added more physical fitness and armed wilderness marching drills, forcing the soldiers to crawl and scramble through the ice and snow to acclimate to the climate as quickly as possible. The amount of live-fire practice was reduced, but the time spent holding their rifles at the ready, weighted down, was drastically increased. Bricks and canteens were hung from the barrels, and they would stand for half a day at a time, all to ensure they could maintain a steady aim even while wearing their heavy, padded clothing. Bang, bang, bang. The crisp reports of gunfire echoed through the river valley from morning till night. Yu Yi and the newly recruited auxiliaries, witnessing the power of these new firearms for the first time, were all left speechless, their mouths agape in awe. At Qubing's invitation, Yu Yi even fired a few shots himself. A fine weapon, truly a fine weapon, he exclaimed, stroking the warm barrel and pulling back the bolt, overcome with emotion. Long range, great power. With this, the enemy will be cut down before they can even get close. And the most crucial thing is, it's so easy to use. Much simpler than learning the bow and arrow. Qubing chuckled beside him. Uncle Yu, you've overlooked the most important point. The most important? Yu Yi was taken aback. Isn't it how quickly you can learn to use it? Qubing shook his head and said mysteriously, of course not. Voiceover. When the administrator of a primitive tribe is suddenly dragged into a steampunk tech exhibition, the culture shock he experiences is probably no less than that of a caveman seeing fire for the first time. And this is only the beginning. The truly decisive weapons are never the ones on display. Sometimes, the deadliest advantage is hidden in the most inconspicuous of details. Qubing chuckled, his expression saying it all. You still have much to learn. Of course, it's production speed. He held up a single finger, wagging it in front of Yu Yi. The divine arm crossbow is made of sinew, horn, and wood. The whole process can take a year and a half, and the weapon is incredibly delicate. The moment it gets wet, the glue fails, and the whole thing is ruined. But this, he slapped the rifle in his hand, producing a dull, metallic thump. As long as we have enough steel and the factories are running at full steam, we can churn out hundreds a day. Sure, they might get relegated to the reserves after a few thousand rounds, but even a retired rifle can outshoot a crossbow at 200 meters. So tell me, Uncle Yu, if both are easy to learn and you need to expand your army quickly, would you choose the firearm or the divine arm crossbow? Is that even a question? Yu Yi rolled his eyes. The firearm, of course. The logic was sound, but compared to the rifle, with its need for precise aim, Yu Yi was clearly more enamored with the simple, brutal power of the shotgun. Boom, 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 boom. Having just learned how to operate it, Yu Yi leveled the shotgun at a distant target and unleashed a furious volley, nearly jumping for joy. Amazing. This is the one. This is the one. He caressed the thick barrel, his face flushed with excitement. A thick barrel, big rounds, incredible power, and a fast firing rate. With this thing, one man could take on 3 of those monsters, no problem. And reloading is a breeze. Just a quick pump, clack clack, and you're good to go. Haha, that's what the chieftain said. This gun is the special gift he prepared for those cannibal apes. Qubing said proudly. By the way, Uncle Yu, do you have a map? And any intel on the enemy? Have you done any reconnaissance? Yes. When it came to official business, Yu Yi immediately grew serious. I'll take you to see it. The two returned to Yu Ye's quarters. A massive cowhide map was spread out on a table, its lines burned in with a hot iron needle. Mountains, rivers, and even the depth of each waterway were marked with perfect clarity. Beside it was a thick logbook detailing the local customs, conditions, and seasonal changes of each location. Qubing felt as if he had struck gold. To familiarize himself with the terrain as quickly as possible, he decided to copy the entire map by hand. Yu Yi stood beside him, acting as a human GPS, answering every question fluently, his knowledge extending even to the seasonal variations of each place. Qubing was secretly astounded. It seemed that for all future strategic planning, he would have to consult this living map. A few days later, Qubing, along with a fully armed platoon of his personal guard, set out with Yu Yi to inspect several observation posts along the river. The soldiers were bundled in heavy, padded coats, their feet sinking into the ankle-deep snow. The rifles in their hands served as convenient walking sticks. "Uncle Yu, where are we?" Walking through a river valley that was a vast, unending sea of white, Qubing was beginning to lose his bearings. "We're standing on the upper reaches of the Luyang and Ruyang rivers," Yu Yi explained with a smile. "Rivers?" Qubing looked down, then unfolded his map to compare. "Where are the rivers? I don't see anything." "Ha ha ha." Yu Yi roared with laughter at his confusion. "The river is right beneath your feet. Sweep the snow away and see for yourself." "Huh." Dubiously, Qubing took an entrenching tool and dug into the snow. With a couple of scrapes, a layer of crystal-clear ice was revealed. Beneath the ice, the clear river water was still flowing slowly, and he could even see a few fish swimming lazily by. "Holy crap, it really is a river," Qubing exclaimed in astonishment. That's just the way of things here," Yu Yi remarked, his feet never stopping as he expertly led the squad forward. Voiceover. When a modern commander with his high-tech map meets a living map who has measured the land with his own 2 feet, he finally understands that true strategic advantage lies not only in the superiority of one's equipment, but in an intimate knowledge of the land itself. Also, never trust your eyes in a northeastern winter, because what you think is solid ground might, with a single crack, become your icy grave in the next second. The group trudged through the river valley, the stones scraping underfoot. They had hiked all morning, then climbed out of the riverbed to push on silently for another couple of hours. The rumbling in their stomachs was louder than the birdsong in the woods. It wasn't until a dark, dense forest loomed on the horizon that Yu Yi, quick as a rabbit, ducked onto an inconspicuous path. After a series of twists and turns around a misshapen earthen mound, a small grove of trees came into view. "We're here," Yu Yi finally said. "Here? Where's the observation post?" Qubing panted, his eyes darting around. There wasn't a house in sight, not even the shadow of a thatched hut. Yu Yi just chuckled, saying nothing, his eyes asking a silent question. "Well, young man, care to guess?" Beside them, an adjutant carrying a leather map tube sniffed the air sharply, his nostrils flaring like a hound's. "Commander, over there. I smell smoke," he exclaimed, pointing. "Firewood smoke." Qubing turned his head. Sure enough, a faint, almost invisible wisp of pale blue smoke was drifting from a low-lying thicket. He stared hard at the thicket, then shot a suspicious glance at Yu Yi. And Yu Yi? He still wore that same infuriating, "Go on, guess again," look on his face. Qubing snorted inwardly. With a wave of his hand, he barked, "All units, on alert. You go check it out." "Sir." In a single, sharp motion, the soldiers raised their rifles, their dark muzzles covering every nook and cranny that could hide a man. The adjutant who had been singled out, the hound-nosed from before, clicked his bayonet into place with a sharp clack and stole forward, crouched low. He prodded the thicket with his bayonet, only to find the smoke was coming from a hollow log lying on its side. The wood had been eaten out by insects, leaving only a shell of bark. The smoke was seeping from the empty husk. Strange. Not a single footprint around. Where's the smoke coming from? He couldn't figure it out. He was just about to turn and report. "Command arg. Ambush." The word "commander" had barely left his lips when an arrow whizzed in from the side. Thwack. Dead center in the chest. The adjutant jolted, his soul nearly leaving his body. But a second later, he realized something was wrong. The arrow hadn't pierced him. It had simply clanged off his breastplate and bounced away. He looked down, The arrow was a bare shaft, no arrowhead. "Ha ha ha." A hearty laugh rang out from the woods. "Stop looking. There's no arrowhead. And no enemies here. We're all friends." Through the laughter, a man holding a longbow emerged. He wore a traditional, crossover-collared robe, his hair tied back, giving him a sharp, capable air. He first gave Yu Yi a fist-in-palm salute, then clasped his hands in a bow toward Qubing before speaking, his tone thick with mockery. "Chief Yu, why bring such a large contingent today? Planning something big? These must be the famed Divine Strategy Guard from the Han tribe, I take it? TSK. With alertness like that, you wouldn't last 3 days in these woods." The man grinned at the shot adjutant, his face a mask of contempt, an unspoken sneer that said they were all hopelessly green. "You." The adjutant's face instantly flushed a deep crimson. Burning with shame and anger, he raised his rifle to take aim. "What are you doing?" Qubing roared. "Lower your weapon. Do you point your rifle at our own people?" The adjutant sullenly lowered his rifle, turned his head away, and let out a heavy snort. Hey, what's all this, Lu Ping? Watch your mouth. Is that any way to talk to our brothers? Yu Ye's face hardened as he addressed the bowman. Then he stepped in to smooth things over. Come, let me make the introductions. This is the commander of our Divine Strategy Guard, young General Qubing. And this is Lu Ping, the head of this observation post. The man, Lu Ping, bowed to Qubing again. Qubing just gave him a quick once-over and grunted through his nose. The man had humbled his soldiers right off the bat, and the fire in Qubing's belly hadn't died down. He wasn't about to give some minor officer the time of day. Qubing, Yu Yi said quickly, sensing the tension, this is our observation post. It's positioned on a critical path the enemy is forced to take. The source of the smoke you saw is actually the chimney for the burrow. The opening is angled with the wind, so the smoke only blows deeper into the mountains. It's completely invisible from the main path. Yu Yi pointed to the hollow log. If it's ever discovered, it plays out just like it did now. That chimney is bait. Anyone who gets curious and moves in for a closer look exposes their back to the woods. Our hidden sentry at the burrow entrance can take them out with a single arrow from behind. It's a contingency plan. You're new here and haven't faced the cannibal tribes yet. From now on, you must not underestimate them. Out here in the wild, you have to keep your eyes peeled and your ears pricked. Their weapons may be crude, but every last one of them is a master hunter. The slightest stir in the grass will put them on alert. Yu Ye's words were both an explanation and a warning. Qubing listened in silence. He had to admit, he had gotten a little cocky. He had been a personal guard to the chief at a young age, and was now the youngest commander in the Han tribe, in charge of the elite Divine Strategy Guard, and wielding the most advanced weapons in the world. Truth be told, he had never taken the cannibals seriously, writing them off as a bunch of blood-drinking savages. But listening to Yu Yi, he was suddenly jolted awake. How could a race that survived by hunting beasts and their own kind be anything but formidable? To survive in such a brutal environment, their combat prowess had to be exceptional. Seeing that his words had sunk in, Yu Yi said no more, not wanting the young man to lose face. The space underground is quite large, more than enough for 100 men, and we have plenty of grain stored. Normally, it's just a 3-man rotation. We only call in more people for specific operations. There are 2 sentry posts. One is outside, on that highland we just passed, which has a commanding view. They saw us coming long ago. The other is right at the burrow entrance, watching the immediate vicinity to prevent the nest from being compromised. There's always one man inside, sleeping, ready to rotate. Let's go. We need to get the soldiers inside for a hot meal. Everyone's been trudging through the wind and snow all day, and they're starving. Qubing looked back at his men. Though they still held their rifles at the ready, the exhaustion on their faces was undeniable. After trekking through the snow for the better part of a day, they needed to rest and recover their strength. All right, we'll follow Uncle Yu's arrangements, Qubing said, gesturing to his men. Everyone, into the burrow to rest. Maintain discipline, and keep the noise down. Lu Ping's eyes were practically glued to Qubing, flitting from the binoculars in his hand to the unfamiliar weapons carried by the adjutants. A burning curiosity, like a cat scratching at his heart, consumed him. All of it came from that place he had never been, the place called the Han tribe. Compass. Qubing scanned the terrain with his binoculars, then held out a hand to his adjutant. An exquisite little wooden box was placed in his palm. Inside lay a compass no more than 5 centimeters in diameter, its face protected by a round, convex lens that magnified the markings clearly. Most ingeniously, a crystal cap was embedded in a corner of the box. It was filled with a liquid, inside which a small bubble floated. Qubing took the compass and carefully tilted it until the bubble was perfectly centered within a red circle on the crystal cap. Only then did he lower his head to read the needle. The things you people use are really something else, Lu Ping finally blurted out. I've seen a compass before. Chief Yu has one, but his is huge and doesn't have a box like this. What's that round thing on top? And what's this corner piece with the water in it? It isn't even full. This? Qubing glanced at him and explained casually. It's the latest model military compass. Small, light, and accurate. This top part is a magnifying glass for reading the markings. In an emergency, you can detach it to start a fire. The thing in the corner is a level. It ensures the compass is flat for an accurate reading. And that's not water, it's dyed alcohol. If it were water, it would have frozen solid in this weather. Having explained, Qubing continued. Have you ambushed cannibal parties here before? Yep, done it plenty of times. Lu Ping replied instantly, his eyes still fixed on the delicate compass. And the results? Qubing asked, though he already knew the answer. He could already tell this was far from a perfect ambush spot. Even if they could repel or annihilate an enemy force, It would be completely contrary to the goal of their current mission. They were here to capture one alive, not to fight the cannibals to the death. Voiceover. Pride comes before a fall. 1 minute our young general is being humbled by a native's headless arrow. The next he's forced to admit that their old ways are more effective than his new ideas. His pride has been on a roller coaster today, soaring high only to plunge low. But it's for the best. A harsh lesson from reality is far better than a fatal one from the enemy on the battlefield. One has to wonder what his soldiers, with their high-tech fire pokers, are thinking right about now. Well, the results depend on the situation. Lu Ping came alive at the topic, his hands waving animatedly. Sometimes we get a good haul and drop a few of them. If they've got numbers, we're like mosquitoes, sting him and run. And we never, ever run back toward the nest. That'd give the whole game away, wouldn't it? Bottom line is, we're the monkey trainers, and they're the monkeys. No matter how we fight, we can't lose. Lu Ping puffed out his chest, his face a mask of pride. Qubing stroked his chin, then posed a critical question. You poke the hornet's nest and run. Do they give chase? Chase? Of course they chase. Lu Ping's eyes went wide. But that was only at the beginning. After they got wise to it, Chief Yu would set up an ambush party ahead of time and hit him hard on the road. After getting smacked around a few times, they learned their lesson. No more reckless pursuits. Besides, whether they chase or not depends on who they're dealing with. Oh, how so? Well, it's about sizing up your opponent. Look, let me put it this way. Lu Ping scratched his head, gesturing. If we hit a party of their old, weak, and sick sent out to forage, those guys run faster than rabbits. Why would they dare give chase? But if we run into one of their hunting parties, all young and strong, that's a different story. If Chief Yu is leading the attack, even with just a few men, they'll chase us down like their lives depend on it. Those bastards hate Chief Yu to the bone. To them, the sight of him is like seeing their father's killer. But if Chief Yu isn't around and our numbers are small, they don't chase, but they don't run either. They just stand there and have a staring contest with you. If our numbers are about even, they might try to test us. If we outnumber them, hey, they take to their heels and vanish. I see, so that's how it is. Qubing nodded thoughtfully, his mind already deploying troops and drawing up battle plans. He finally understood. You had to use different tactics for different enemies. But the fundamental principle remained the same. You must have superior numbers. Only by concentrating an overwhelming force and surrounding them on all sides could they possibly capture anyone alive. Otherwise, what was the point if one of his squads could mow down 100 of them? The chieftain wanted prisoners who could breathe and work, not a pile of dead meat. Qubing, what are you staring at? Not going in for a meal? You enjoying the taste of the north wind out here? Yi had appeared from behind at some point. After settling the main force in, he had waited and waited for Qubing, and finally came out to find him personally. Uncle Yu, you're just in time. Qubing's face lit up as if he'd seen his savior. Let me ask you, do those cannibals really pass by here often? How many come each time? And on what sort of schedule? They do, Yi said after a moment's thought. They come often. Sometimes a few dozen, sometimes 300 or 400, and that's just on their way south. If they're returning from the south with captives, the numbers are anyone's guess. It all depends on how many poor souls they've snatched. As for frequency, every 3 to 5 days, I'd say. Every 3 to 5 days, you're guaranteed to see their ghostly shadows slinking around here. So, to summarize, Qubing immediately concluded, they head south frequently and on a relatively regular schedule. But their return trip north is unpredictable, both in terms of numbers and timing. Exactly. This is the source of the Ruyang and Luyang rivers. Those two rivers are their natural highways. Whether they're raiding southward or just fishing and hunting for shrimp, they have to pass through here. But the frequency isn't set in stone. Yi stood atop the highland and pointed toward the vast sea of forest to the north, looking every bit the part of a senior cannibal studies expert. I've been squatting here for nearly 4 years. I've pretty much figured out the nature of these bastards. They're like ant colonies, scattered throughout that northern forest, and they live on just 3 things. First, traps. But there's a problem. Their old traps have been in use for centuries. The dumb animals in the forest were eaten long ago. The ones left are cunning as can be, they're not falling for it. Even if a few clueless ones wander in, it's not enough meat to fill the gaps between their teeth. Second, the hunting grounds to the east. East of the forest is all mountains, rocky hills, sparse woods, and vast grasslands. There's a lot of game over there. Giant horned deer, argali, wild bison, woolly rhinos, all in huge herds. When the traps are empty, they organize their young men for a hunt in the east. This third one depends on the whims of the heavens. Yuya's expression turned serious. This godforsaken place has a brutally long winter, at least 6 months. If, in the first 3 months, the snows are heavy and it gets devilishly cold, burying all the grass roots and tree bark, those herds of grazers in the east have to migrate south to survive. When that happens, the cannibals lose their food source and have no choice but to risk heading south to snatch people for food. When they're truly desperate, they'll even eat those from their own nests. Even if the snow isn't heavy in the first 3 months, those beasts will have gnawed the ground bare. By the last 3 months of winter, they still have to migrate south. So, the golden window for the cannibals to hunt is only the first 3 months. During these 3 months, they have to hunt and stockpile food with everything they've got. If they don't store enough, they still have to go south to raid for people and provisions in the end. Qubing was stunned. It was the first time he had ever heard such a theory. The cannibals' southern raids were dictated by the weather forecast? But then, a thought struck him, and he saw a flaw in the logic. That's not right, Uncle You. I remember the chieftain first ran into them in the Tree Tribe's territory in the autumn. Later, when they attacked our city, it seemed to be winter, but they'd come in the spring and summer before, too. The timing doesn't add up. How does it not add up? Yi shot him a sideways glance. Let me ask you, how long did it take you to get here by boat? Before Qubing could answer, Yi answered his own question. It took you over a month by boat. Those cannibals have no horses, no boats, no carts, just their own 2 legs. Even if they set out in winter, wouldn't it take them months to reach our territory? If they travel slowly, it could take a year. Who knows what year or month the group that attacked our tribe even crawled out of their den. Also, I left something out. It's not just winter. If there's a late spring cold snap, or if spring arrives a month or 2 late and they run out of stored food while the eastern herds haven't returned, they'll head south then, too, even if it is spring. By that calculation, it's entirely plausible for them to set out in the spring and wander into Han tribe lands by autumn. That silenced Qubing completely. Looked at that way, it was indeed possible. Who knew if they stopped along the way for a bit of hunting, attacked a smaller tribe, and took some time to digest before moving on? With all the stopping and starting, it was impossible to calculate their travel time. Getting hung up on that detail was pointless. Come on, let's eat. Yi clapped him on the shoulder. In this cold, if you don't eat your fill, you'll freeze solid. This time, Qubing didn't argue. Flanked by his 2 adjutants, he ducked into the underground outpost. The entrance was hidden beneath the roots of a massive dead tree, a sloping ramp leading 5 or 6 meters underground. Below was a straight tunnel, not very high, perhaps 1.5 meters, forcing one to walk hunched over, but wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast. Flanking the tunnel were 2 bedrooms on each side, filled with large communal bunks that could sleep dozens. Piles of grain were stacked on the floor, leaving little room for anything else. At the end of the tunnel was the kitchen, its centerpiece a large, circular stove that also provided heat to the bunks in all 4 bedrooms. The sentry on duty and the young man who had just been relieved were busy working there. The food was decent enough. Cornbread cakes, cured meat and sausage smoked as hard as wood, and some pickled vegetables. In this frozen wasteland, a hot meal was a godsend. An adjutant brought Qubing his meal in a mess kit. For cornbread cakes, 2 sausages, and a pickled cucumber. As he ate, his mind was still racing, processing everything Yi had just told him. Voiceover. You see, war at the highest level is never just about fighting. It's a comprehensive contest of meteorology, geography, and biology. Today, student Qubing got a free introductory course on cannibal behavioral studies, taught by Professor Yi. The core lesson: don't reason with a hungry enemy, and never bet against Mother Nature. Knowledge, indeed, is power. Crack. Qubing bit into a crisp pickled cucumber, the salty tang exploding in his mouth, and with it, a thought. Uncle You, where do you get your salt? I don't recall the tribe ever sending you any. And what about those cannibals? Where do they get their salt? The tribe sends it. Yi chuckled at the notion. If we had to rely on the tribe shipping salt over 1,000 miles, the chieftain would have shut this base down long ago. The transport cost alone would kill us. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Our salt, and the cannibal salt, all comes from the same place, the salt pans over by the eastern hunting grounds. Think about it. Without salt, why would those herds of cattle, sheep, and deer gather there? They need their salt fixed too, right? We dig our salt right out of the ground. So you're both dipping from the same salt pot. You never run into each other. Qubing pressed. Never fought over it. Gods, of course we did. Yi slapped his thigh. At first, we didn't know where the salt was either. We were like thieves, sneaking around, following the cannibals, running around like headless chickens ourselves. When we finally found their salt pans, you think we were polite. We robbed them blind. We were short on men back then. We fought a few times, won some, lost some. Both sides took heavy casualties. Later, our scouts got more familiar with the area and discovered there was more than one salt pan in the east. To cut down on casualties, we switched to a different spot. The cannibals knew, but by then our numbers had grown. If they wanted to monopolize all the salt pans, they had to weigh their own strength. So now, it's a sort of live and let live situation. We dig ours, they dig theirs. We haven't come to blows in a long time. Hearing this, Qubing's eyes lit up. After listening to Yu Ye's long-winded explanation, the jumbled mess in his mind instantly cleared. A three-pronged battle plan materialized, fully formed. First prong, seize the salt pans. Salt was life. Without it, even the fiercest cannibal would grow weak in the knees. Seizing their salt pans was like squeezing their throats. It would be a miracle if they didn't fight to the death. Second prong, cut off their supplies. Send men to the eastern hunting grounds to specifically target their hunting parties. This would accomplish two things: capture able-bodied men and sever their food source. Let's see how arrogant they could be with empty stomachs. Third prong, lie in wait for the exhausted prey. Once they were deprived of salt and food and unable to defeat the Divine Strategy Guard, their only path to survival would be to head south. At that point, he would set up a pocket ambush along their inevitable route, catching them one by one, nabbing them in pairs. After these three strikes had whittled down their strength, the rest would be easy. He would press forward with his main army, pushing through their villages one by one, uprooting them completely. A fire ignited in Qubing's heart at the thought. He immediately grabbed Yu Yi. "Uncle Yu, I just had an idea. I want your opinion." He pulled Yu Yi aside and, in a hushed voice, laid out his three-pronged plan. Then he stared at him expectantly. "Uncle Yu, what do you think? Will it work?" Yu Yi stroked his chin, pondering for a long moment before speaking slowly. "It's a good plan. Vicious and ruthless. But do you have the manpower? The Divine Strategy Guard has only about 2,000 men in total. If you spread them out like that, all three fronts will be stretched thin. Don't you risk being defeated in detail. I still think it's better to take it one step at a time. Concentrate your forces and crack one tough nut first. That's the safer bet." Qubing grinned, revealing a set of white teeth. "Manpower is not an issue. The Divine Strategy Guard may not be numerous, but our combat effectiveness is second to none. Losing? Not a possibility. It's only a matter of how much we stand to gain. Besides, the chieftain told me before we left that a force like the Divine Strategy Guard needs to be used flexibly, not tied down to one spot. A single platoon is enough to complete many missions. We have exactly 3 battalions, each with over 700 rifles, plus auxiliary troops. Dividing them among 3 locations is more than enough." He saw the deep furrows in Yu Ye's brow and knew what the old general was worried about. "Uncle Yu, I know you're concerned that we're greenhorns who've never seen a real battlefield, but we will follow orders without question. Just tell us where to hit and how to hit them, and we guarantee we'll complete the mission." To be frank, the chieftain sent us here to get our hands dirty. The soldiers need training, and so do the generals. This is the Han tribe's first purely firearms-based unit. Nobody really knows what to expect. The cannibals are a whetstone. Not too hard, not too soft, just right for us to sharpen our blades. Qubing's words were firm and resonant, and the furrows on Yu Ye's brow gradually smoothed out. He remembered the adjutant who had been startled by the headless arrow earlier, and he did feel a bit uneasy. But while these young men were arrogant, their drive and confidence were something the old veterans couldn't match. Besides, how to wage the war was Qubing's business as the commander. An old soldier like himself could offer advice, but he couldn't pull rank and dictate every move. "All right, we'll do it your way." Yu Yi finally nodded. With the plan set, the two of them huddled over a map, hashing out the details of troop deployment and logistics. "According to your plan, we'll have to strike the eastern front first." Yu Ye's finger traced a line on the map. "We'll station 1 battalion at the hunting grounds and another at the salt marsh, each with auxiliary troops, and take the offensive, driving them south. The last battalion will be ambushed here at the river mouth to deliver a head-on blow." But, his tone shifted, moving so many men at once presents a major problem with food. The river's frozen, so boats can't move. For land transport, we have no carts or animals. We can't have the soldiers carry their own rations, can we? 1 bag per man won't last more than a few days. Not to mention, if we capture prisoners, those men have mouths to feed too. Qubing's brow furrowed into a knot as well. No food, no ammo. What kind of war could they fight? "So, Uncle Yu, do you have any brilliant ideas?" A solution is not entirely out of the question. Yu Ye's eyes narrowed, a glint in them. "Don't use the auxiliary troops from the River Valley camp. Send your main battalions directly, and we'll scrounge up a few hundred local auxiliaries, 1,000 men in total. That way, you've cut the number of mouths to feed by half. As for the shortage of auxiliaries, that's even easier to solve. At the hunting grounds and the salt marsh, we'll recruit on the spot. The population there isn't as dense as it is here, but recruiting 1,000 auxiliaries will be a piece of cake. Those 200 or 300 men you bring from the river valley won't be idle either. They'll be your dedicated transport corps. They'll ship ammunition over and escort the captured prisoners back. We've already got the prisoners' quarters set up here, a seamless operation. What do you think? Brilliant. Qubing slapped his thigh. That's a great idea. The overall strategy remains the same, but the details are even more cunning. Let's do it. Done. Since we've decided, we act. Yu Yi declared, ever the man of action. He slapped his thigh. Your divine strategy guard still needs to deploy to those 2 camps, and we need ammunition and supplies sent over from the river valley. Those outposts are running on fumes. They can't support your entire force. Right? I'll make the arrangements now. Qubing was a man of action himself. He immediately summoned a messenger. As he dictated, the scribe's brush flew across the paper, and a deployment order was quickly drafted. Qubing scanned it, signed his name, and brought his official seal down with a resounding thump. Effective immediately, the messenger took the order and, guided by the sharp-eyed young man from the observation post, the 2 of them mounted a single horse, kicking up a cloud of snow as they sped toward the river valley camp. Next came the wait for the main force to arrive. But Qubing was not one to sit idle. He led his soldiers out of the burrow to reassess their deployment. This position is no good, Qubing announced, sweeping the surrounding terrain with his binoculars. It's fine for a simple ambush, but it won't let us encircle them. We can't squander our strength on a partial engagement. He lowered his binoculars and, with a wave of his hand, began to issue commands. Guard platoon, divide into 3 groups. Squads 1, 2, and 3 will form Group 1, led by the deputy platoon leader. Move to the edge of the woods to the northwest and lie low. Squads 4, 5, and 6, Group 2, led by the platoon leader. You will hide behind that snowy slope to the east. Squads 7, 8, and 9, Group 3, led by the political instructor. You will remain in your current position. The 3 positions will support each other like the points of a triangle. The moment the enemy is spotted, I want you to clamp down on them like a pair of pincers. In addition, Group 3 will be responsible for delivering meals to the other 2 groups. We'll rotate weekly. Understood. Understood. A resounding chorus of voices replied from below. Understood, yes, but... The guard platoon leader scratched his head, raising a practical issue. Commander, what about the positions for Groups 1 and 2? We can't just start digging burrows, can we? It's the middle of winter. The ground is frozen solid. Besides, the noise from all that digging would be immense. The enemy would spot us before we're even finished. Wouldn't that be a waste of effort? Hearing this, Qubing calmly scooped up a handful of snow and kneaded it in his hand. I've already thought of that, he said, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. We're short on everything here except snow. We'll use what we have and build snow shelters. We'll pile up a large mound of snow, big enough for 3 people to lie down inside. Leave an opening, pour water on the outside to freeze it solid, then hollow out the snow from within. Line it with straw and pine needles. Wrap yourselves in your quilts, and it'll be no worse than a tent. The soldiers stared in disbelief. What in the world? Build a house out of snow and pour water on it? Wouldn't that make it an igloo? Sleeping in a block of ice, we'd freeze into sculptures. Commander, will this really work? Can you actually sleep in a snow shelter? The platoon leader asked, his face a mask of doubt. Why wouldn't it work? Qubing shot him a glance. It's the same principle as a tent. It blocks the wind. The only difference is the material. You don't believe me? We'll build one right here as a demonstration for everyone. No sooner said than done. The group found a spot with deep snow, piled on more, and packed it down firmly with their entrenching tools. Soon, a snow mound the size of a 3-man tent took shape. Next, they set up a pot and melted snow. Before the water was even warm, they were ladling it onto the mound with their mess tins. Half an hour later, a minor miracle had occurred. A translucent shell of ice had indeed formed on the outside of the mound, making it look like a giant, frosted block. They then used their entrenching tools to hollow out the snow from the inside and sprinkled a layer of fresh powder on the ice shell to prevent reflection. Finally, they gathered soft pine boughs from the forest and laid them inside. A simplified version of an igloo stood before them. Looking out from the inside, a grayish-blue light filtered through the ice, creating a unique, tranquil atmosphere. Didn't you say you couldn't sleep in it? Qubing looked around. Who wants to give it a try for the rest of us? I will. The guard platoon leader volunteered. As a southerner, it was his first time seeing so much snow, let alone building a shelter out of it. He was itching with curiosity. He ducked inside. A blast of cold air mixed with the fresh scent of pine needles greeted him, which was surprisingly pleasant. He lay down on the thick layer of boughs in his military coat. The branches were soft, and the round ice dome blocked the vicious wind outside. He lay there for a moment, then crawled back out, shouting excitedly, "Commander, it's perfect. It blocks the wind, and it's sturdy. With enough branches underneath, it's not cold. We just need to block the entrance when we sleep. I think stuffing a backpack with some leaves will do the trick." Naturally, Qubing smiled. You Southerners have never seen this. For us Northerners, who didn't dig snow caves as a kid, sleeping in them is no problem at all. All right, you've all seen how it's done. Get to it. Qubing commanded. There are still a couple of hours until nightfall. In groups of 3, start building. Let's all be moved into our own Snowview rooms by dark. Sir. The men roared in unison, ready to split up and get to work. Wait. Yuya's voice suddenly stopped them. Uncle Yu, is there something else? Qubing looked over, puzzled. Do you have any spare cloth? Yuyi explained. It would be best to get some to cover the soldiers' mouths and noses. For one, it'll keep them warm. For another, it'll hide the white plumes of their breath. You're so close to the enemy, a single puff of breath could give away your position. Qubing's eyes lit up. He hadn't thought of that detail. We have cloth, but not on us. It'll have to be sent from the camp. Then send someone back for it immediately, Yuyi urged. Right. Qubing nodded, then addressed his men again. All groups, take note. Don't let a single breath betray you when you're in hiding. Also, when you dig your snow caves, make the opening on the leeward side. Don't be a fool and have it face the main path. Sir. The men responded once more, then broke off and threw themselves into their work with gusto. 3 men to a shelter, 3 combat groups, for a total of only 9 shelters. 9 inconspicuous mounds of snow, scattered along the edge of the forest like natural drifts. Who would have thought that a platoon of deadly soldiers was hiding inside? They worked until evening, and finally, everyone was settled. After a hot meal together in the underground outpost, and filling their thermoses with hot water, they each returned to their homes to sleep. The night passed without incident. The next day, all 3 positions were quiet. It wasn't until around noon, when the sun was making everyone drowsy, that Yuyi nudged Qubing, who was lying next to him, with his foot. They're here, he said, his voice low and concise. Qubing's spirits lifted. He'd been here for over 10 days. Was he finally going to see one in the flesh? He followed Yuye's pointed finger and saw a line of disheveled, animal skin-clad figures emerge from the woods. They moved in single file with a shambling confidence, as if they owned the very ground they walked on. Voiceover. When it comes to practical skills, the soldiers of the Divine Strategy Guard are clearly top tier. One minute they're southern boys full of doubt about igloos, the next they're expert snow builders. But the devil is in the details of war. A single reminder from the old veteran, Yu Yi, could very well decide the success or failure of this ambush. It just goes to show, there's no substitute for experience. Drive and slick moves aren't always enough for the young. Sometimes, an old hand's wisdom is more effective than any gun. The animal skins they wore were so greasy, you could have scraped a layer of oil from them. Their hair was a matted mess, and many had their torsos and legs exposed to the biting cold. Their skin was purpled, marked with crooked white patterns, likely the sacred totems of their tribe. The group, a mix of old and young, brandished crude stone spears and axes. With a chorus of howls, they charged toward a bend in the frozen river, the very fishing spot Lu Ping had mentioned, their usual diner. Once on the ice, the ragged figures began to hack away at it with their tools. Someone nearby deftly started a fire, while others hauled large rocks from the shore and began smashing them down onto the ice with resounding thuds. A teeming mass of them covered the ice, at least 70 or 80 strong. Uncle Yu, call the men. Get them out here, quiet now, don't let them spot us. Qubing hissed, his eyes glued to the ice-breaking operation below. I'll contact the other 2 positions. Right. Yuyi nodded, then looked utterly bewildered. But how are you going to contact them? If you yell, you'll give us all away. Qubing said nothing, simply pulling a hollow, bronze disc from his coat. With a click, he pressed a clasp on the side. The disc popped open like a clam, revealing a small, gleaming mirror inside. With this, he adjusted the mirror's angle, reflecting a blinding ray of sunlight directly into the faces of the sentries at the other 2 positions. The 2 sentries, who had been lying in a state of utter boredom, were jolted awake by the flash of light. It was a signal. Only their own people knew how to use mirror reflections. These savages couldn't manage it. They immediately looked toward the main position and saw Qubing gesturing to them. First, Qubing pointed to his own ear, then to the rifle in his hand. The meaning was clear. On the sound of the gunshot, open fire. A stir went through the two positions as the hidden soldiers were quietly roused. They raised their rifles, the air filled with the soft clack-clack of bolts being drawn. Dark muzzles silently emerged from behind snowdrifts and tree trunks. Listen up, the two platoon leaders whispered their final instructions. If you can hit a leg, don't aim for the chest or head. If you can take out an old one, leave the young ones be. We're here to capture prisoners, not to slaughter. Understood. Understood, the soldiers whispered back. At the main position, a rustling sound arose behind Qubing as the three squads on standby moved up. Commander, Qubing turned to the political instructor. Don't all come up here. Get into ambush positions on either side of this high ground. Wait for my command, and be ready for close combat. Did you bring the handcuffs? We did. I'll get them in position. Everyone with me. Hold your fire, prepare to charge. Yu Yi and Lu Ping took up positions on either side of Qubing. Yu Yi, binoculars raised, watched intently. Lu Ping's eyes, on the other hand, were practically glued to Qubing's rifle, burning with curiosity. What's the plan? Yu Yi asked succinctly. Take out a few of the old ones first, scare the hell out of them. Then we charge, drive them back, and let the other two positions close the net, Qubing replied without looking up. Oh, as simple as that. Yes, it's about to start. Qubing answered, then held his breath, the crosshairs of his scope steady on a target. 200 meters away on the ice, a bare-chested old man was using all his strength to smash the ice with a large rock. The moment he straightened up to catch his breath, crack! A deafening roar, like a thunderclap from a clear sky, shattered the silence of the river valley. The bullet, carrying a terrifying kinetic force, struck the old man's head with pinpoint accuracy. In the next second, his head exploded like a watermelon smashed with a hammer, a spray of red and white showering those around him. The headless body crumpled to the ground, twitched twice, and was still. Through his binoculars, Yu Ye's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, his jaw threatening to unhinge. It was the first time he had seen a rifle used on a person. Gods, the power was absolutely terrifying. Lu Ping, beside him, was scared witless. He still couldn't fathom what kind of divine weapon this rifle was. A single sound, not even the shadow of an arrow, and a man over 200 meters away was just gone. His head looked as if it had been smashed by a god's giant hammer. The cannibals around the dead man were stunned, frozen in place. A clear, sunny day? Where did the thunder come from? How could a man just die like that? And in such a horrific way? An ambush? But where was the enemy? Not a single shadow to be seen. What in the world was going on? Everyone instinctively looked in the direction of the gunshot. Qubing suddenly felt that taking potshots from a prone position wasn't commanding enough, that it lacked a certain intimidating effect. So he simply stood up, exposing himself on the hilltop. At this distance, their stone spears and axes couldn't touch him. All units, Qubing bellowed. Advance slowly, push them back. The moment he moved, the enemy finally spotted him. So, it was an ambush. Their weapons were strange, but there didn't seem to be many of them. Just 20 or so. And on their side, there were 70 or 80. Instead of running, they gathered together, raising their crude weapons and watching Qubing's group warily, as if weighing their chances. From their perspective, the men opposite them were just holding short wooden sticks, without even shields. They looked like easy prey. Aim for the ground at their feet. Fire! Qubing ordered again, raising his rifle and firing another shot. Bang! Bang bang bang. In the cannibals' formation, an old man holding a broken shield suddenly clutched his thigh and fell with a scream. Then, a volley of shots erupted like a string of firecrackers. The three squads of soldiers spread out in a wide arc, advancing and firing as they went. The bullets weren't aimed at the men, but hissed and whizzed into the ice at their feet. Crackle! Shards of ice shattered by the bullets flew everywhere like buckshot, stinging the cannibals' bodies. Even more terrifying was the continuous, thunderous noise. They finally understood that the deadly sound was coming from the short wooden sticks in the hands of the green-clad men. In that moment, a primal fear of the unknown seized their hearts. Charge! After 5 rounds, use your rifles as clubs. Qubing roared again, leading the charge down from the high ground. At the command, the soldiers worked their bolts and fired in a single, fluid motion. The gunfire was incessant, ice shards flew, and a few unlucky souls were hit in the legs and feet by stray bullets, writhing on the ground in pain. Seeing the green-clad men charging and firing, getting closer and closer, the cannibals' small formation finally broke. A young boy dropped his shield and ran, screaming and crying. Where one ran, A second and a third followed. With a sudden rush, everyone turned tail and fled for their lives toward the forest. Just then, the ambushers from the other two positions emerged from the snow. They formed a line, completely cutting off the cannibals' retreat, and their rifles opened fire simultaneously. A three-sided attack. An instant encirclement. The cannibals were already terrified. They looked at the dark muzzles with despair, huddling together, expecting a massacre. However, when the Divine Strategy Guard soldiers charged in, they used their empty rifles as clubs and laid into them. In groups of 3, their tactics were clear. One stood guard with a short-barreled shotgun, another used his rifle but to knock a man down, and the last one swiftly pulled out handcuffs and, with a click, slapped them on. Just then, a particularly ferocious-looking old cannibal, unwilling to be captured, was driven by extreme fear to a state of feral rage. When a soldier swung his rifle butt at him, he managed to block it, knocking the soldier aside, and tried to break through the encirclement. For a moment, the soldiers of the Divine Strategy Guard hesitated. After all, the man was surrounded. To kill him now might earn them a reprimand back at camp. For an instant, no one fired. Voiceover. When it comes to the correct use of advanced weaponry, student Qubing put on a textbook demonstration today. From psychological warfare to suppressive fire, and finally to physical salvation, his combination of moves left the cannibals completely disoriented. However, these greenhorns, while effective in a fair fight, seem to have a bit of a saintly heart when it comes to getting their hands dirty. It seems their training has only just begun. What are you all standing around for? He's getting away. Shoot him. Qubing's roar was a thunderclap that jolted the stunned soldiers back to their senses. They instinctively raised their short-barreled shotguns and pulled the triggers on the fleeing old man. Boom, 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 boom. Over 20 shotguns roared at once, the sound merging into a single, ear-splitting blast. The cannibal, a dozen meters away, was in a dead sprint 1 second, and the next, he was gone. His entire body, as if erased by an invisible force, vanished, leaving only a grisly spray of mangled flesh and blood across the snow. One shotgun shell contained 7 lead pellets the size of soybeans. Over 20 guns firing at once meant nearly 150 pellets had torn through him in an instant. The soldiers who had fired were themselves dumbfounded. Gods above, is this powerful? They knew from target practice that it could blow a large hole in a wooden board. This was the first time they had used it on a living creature. Who could have imagined a person could be blown apart like that? No wonder the chieftain had called this a divine weapon for dealing with monsters. If they unleashed a volley like that on those giant apes of the cannibal tribe, a shiver went down their spines. The mental image was too gruesome to contemplate. Quick, stop gawking. Get the prisoners tied up. Qubing's voice rang out again, snapping everyone back to reality. Both the stunned soldiers and the terrified prisoners swallowed hard in unison. As the soldiers scrambled to handcuff the captives, they couldn't help but steal glances at the mosaic of flesh not far away. The prisoners, on the other hand, were petrified. A few who had been thinking of resisting instantly became docile after seeing the old man's fate. Some even held out their hands before the rifle butts could land, their posture a silent plea for mercy. That single volley had shattered everyone's nerve. By the time Yu Yi and Lu Ping came running up from behind, panting, the battle was over. All the prisoners were securely handcuffed. The entire engagement, from the first shot to the cleanup, had taken less than 5 minutes. Well, I'll be. Yu Yi took in the clean, efficient scene, then looked at the mangled remains and couldn't help but swallow again. You men work fast. And that thing, what's it called, a shotgun? The power. No wonder the chieftain only sent 2,000 of you. It wasn't just Yu Yi. Even the soldiers of the Divine Strategy Guard, in their first real battle, hadn't fully processed what had happened. They were all a bit dazed, acting on instinct, the conditioned reflexes from their long training allowing them to maintain a soldierly bearing even in the midst of extreme shock. This isn't the time for that. Qubing's voice carried a hint of barely perceptible nervousness. Let's clean up the battlefield. His first time leading troops, his first time killing with his own hands. To say he wasn't nervous would be a lie. He just wanted everyone to get busy, to keep their hands and minds occupied so they wouldn't have time for stray thoughts. Right. Yu Yi snapped back to reality. Lu Ping, lend a hand. Sir. Lu Ping's reply was crisp and clear. Having witnessed the capabilities of the Divine Strategy Guard firsthand, he was now thoroughly convinced. These greenhorns were lethally efficient. All groups, report casualties, gains, and ammunition expenditure. Qubing began to rattle off a series of commands. Check the prisoners for wounded. Treat the valuable ones, and as for the worthless ones, deal with them on the spot. Sir. Also, Qubing suddenly remembered something. Collect all the spent casings. That stuff is made of copper. It's expensive. The men acknowledged again, then dispersed to clean up the battlefield. The final tally was impressive. 6 were killed. 1 had his head blown off by Qubing. Another was obliterated by the shotguns. And the remaining 4 were simply unlucky, shot in the leg. They fell and were finished off by stray bullets. 9 were wounded. 5 were critical, with shattered leg bones or severed arteries. They were beyond saving. The remaining 4 had minor wounds, bullets that had passed clean through their legs. As long as infection didn't set in, they would heal on their own. Commander, the guard platoon's political instructor ran up with the report. In this engagement, our platoon suffered no casualties. We expended 427 rifle rounds and 28 shotgun shells. We have neutralized an enemy force of 78, with 63 captured. Awaiting your orders.